Now we start taking a look at our flag quiz game activity, and you can see here at line 37 that class flag quiz game extends activity, so this is the main activity for our app. Now from the list of import statements that you see at the top of the source code file here, you can see that we're using quite a number of classes in this example. Up at the top here, you'll notice that we have a couple of imports from the java.io package. We'll be taking advantage of input stream to help us read in the image files and turn them into drawables. We've got several classes from the java.util package, classes and interfaces I should say, and we'll be using various data structures from java.util to maintain information in this app. Some of the other key new features that we'll be taking advantage of, line 19, we have the Asset Manager class being imported. And again, we'll be taking advantage of that class for the purpose of loading up the assets in the assets folder. So again, we have this assets folder where we've chosen a certain way to organize the images that are processed in this app, and we'll use the Asset Manager for that purpose of managing those assets. Now, when we load up those assets, we're going to be turning them into drawables, so we've imported the drawable class as well. And recall that after you answered a question correctly, there was a short delay, and then the next image would get displayed. And the way we did that is by using a runnable from the java.lang package, a runnable, and passing it to a handler so that the handler could execute that runnable at a later time on the GUI thread. Anytime you're modifying the graphical user interface, you want to make sure you do that in the GUI thread of execution. There is a special class that we'll take a look at actually in the next lesson called Surface View, which is meant for cases where you need to update the on-screen items, whether they be graphics or GUI, from separate threads of execution. So here we need to make sure that we do everything that modifies the graphical user interface in the main GUI thread of execution. Now we're also using log for the first time, which is what you can use to report error messages. It's really handy during debugging and also for having users of your apps give you information if the app crashes, for example. We'll be taking advantage of logging in this example just to write out our error messages, and I'll show you where you can see those messages in the IDE as well. Now, a couple of other new items that we're using here. We've got the menu class, which represents the concept of a menu in Android, and of course menu items within a menu. And finally, the other new thing that we'll be taking advantage of is the animation capabilities for view animations. We have class animation, which represents an animation, and the class animation utils, which we use to load up an animation in the first place. Now, as far as our instance variables and static variables go, you can see here at line 40 that we have a static final string called tag, and this is just the string flag quiz game activity. When you use this string with the logging capabilities, the tag that you specify is going to show up as part of the error message, which makes it easier for you to filter the list of messages that's being written out to see the ones that are specific to your activity. So it's actually a recommended practice that anytime you use the logging mechanism, you provide your own tag string. That way you can filter out your messages from all the other system messages and potential other error messages that are being logged. We have a bunch of other instance variables that we've declared as well. You can see here that we have the list called file name list, a list of strings, and that's going to represent all the different names of the files for the countries that we're working with. We have the quiz countries list, which is just the list of countries that are correct answers in the quiz. We have a regions map, which tells us which regions of the world are enabled during the quiz so that we know where to choose flag images from. So you can see once again that we have 6 regions that we're dealing with in the assets folder, and we need to know which of these folders we're actually going to be picking images from. And then within each folder you can see that each image is preceded by the region of the world in terms of the file name. So Africa-Algeria says that Algeria is in the Africa region, and we'll pick off pieces of this or assemble strings to make up these names depending on where we are in the app. And you can see also that if a country has a multi-word name, we separate the different words in the name with an underbar. And we'll be pulling out the pieces of these strings that represent the file names and using them inside the app. So just going back over to our variables here again, we have a string that represents the current correct answer. So we'll be keeping track of that so we know on each individual quiz whether or not the user has selected correctly. We keep track of the total number of guesses and the total number of correct answers. Eventually the total number of correct answers will be 10 because we have a 10-question quiz, and it won't move to the next flag in the quiz the way it's currently implemented until you've guessed the right answer. But we're going to use total guesses and correct answers together to figure out the percentage correct that you got based on your total guesses. We have guess rows, which helps us determine how many options to display. By default, we'll display one row of options, which has 3 buttons in it, but remember we can have 2 rows or 3 rows for a total of 6 or 9 options as well. We have a random number generator, the random class that we'll be using because we want to randomly pick the images in the animation. And we have an animation object that we're going to call shake animation that will load up using the animation utilities provided by Android. And then finally we have some view variables. The answer text view we need so we can change the text on the answer text view. The question number text view we use to change the text on that represents which question the user is currently answering, question 1 of so-and-so, 2 of blah blah blah. And then at lines 55 and 56 we have an image view and a table layout. The image view so that we can display the image on the screen, and the table layout so that we can manipulate the rows of buttons in the app.